Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. The upcoming school year is about to start, so I figured it would be a good idea to go over some terms that students will encounter in AP Lang. So these terms, some of them are probably ones that you already know, others might be new to you. These come from the course description and the rubrics, and they're just terms that you'll likely hear throughout the year, and it would be helpful if you know what they mean. There's an old joke that says AP stands for answer the prompt. Now, that's obviously not true because AP stands for advanced placement. However, it's really important to understand what a prompt is. You're going to be given 3 different types of prompts on the exam. We'll talk about those later on in the video. But basically, it's really important to remember that you're going to be given a prompt, so a question that you're supposed to answer or a topic you're supposed to address, and you really need to stick to that prompt. The next term that you need to know is a claim. Now, a claim is an assertion or a stance. Now, you're going to have an overarching claim of your essay that's going to be your thesis, and then each of your body paragraphs typically have their own claim, their own main point. According to the AP Lang rubrics, students need a defensible thesis. So you actually earn 1 point if you have a defensible thesis. So basically what this means is that you have to have your own unique position that you can prove. You cannot just restate the prompt. When you write an essay for AP Lang, you're also going to be evaluated on your selection of evidence. And so evidence is going to be used to prove your thesis. You need evidence to support your claim and to prove your claim. Now, depending on the type of essay you're writing, the evidence will either come from the passage or it will come from your own knowledge. There are a couple different ways to include evidence in your AP Lang essays. One way is a direct quote. Now, as the name suggests, you are directly quoting a passage or a source. We typically want you to include shorter direct quotes and not longer ones because they're not your own words. We really want you to use the evidence to lead to commentary, which is your own analysis. So when you're selecting evidence and you're using quotes, try not to use ones that are too long because that actually detracts from the quality of your essay. However, you do need evidence, and direct quotes are a great way to do that. Another way to include evidence is to paraphrase. So this is basically when you take a passage or a source and you put it in your own words, but you still stay true to the original meaning. Just like with direct quotes, typically speaking, when you paraphrase, you want to focus on a smaller portion of text because otherwise it could look like you're trying to summarize the entire passage or source, and there are times when that could be counterproductive. A term that I mention sometimes in my videos, and I know other teachers use this phrasing as well, is embedded evidence. Some people say an embedded quote. So basically, this is a way to use a direct quote more effectively. We don't want to just plop it into our essay and have it be a freestanding quote because that's really jarring to your reader. Instead, you want to take that shorter quote and integrate it into a sentence of your own. That makes it read much more smoothly. Now, if you're curious about how to do this, I do have some videos about this on my channel. When writing an essay, you need to prove your defensible thesis with evidence and commentary. So we already talked a little bit about evidence, but now we need to talk about the commentary portion because that's usually the harder part for students and it's incredibly important. So once you include a piece of evidence, we expect to follow it with some commentary. Commentary is when you explain the significance of the evidence. It's kind of like the why or the because. So commentary is your own original thoughts, your own original interpretations. It's basically the analysis. You can earn up to 4 points for your evidence and commentary. So this actually amounts to the bulk of your score. Now, the final point on the rubric is going to be the sophistication point. This is the hardest point to earn. So sophistication can be achieved in a variety of ways. One way is by elevating the quality of the writing due to a nuanced argument. You could also have a vivid and descriptive writing style, or you could situate it in a broader context. If you situate an issue in a broader context, it means that you're examining the deep, complex, or wide-ranging implications of the issue, so you want to go beyond what has been provided for you in your sources or passage. So you want to think about the deeper, real-world implications, and sometimes this actually requires your own background knowledge as well. When you read a text, it's going to have a line of reasoning, and when you write your own essay, you want to create a line of reasoning as well. So a line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas, and that includes effective transitions between paragraphs and within paragraphs. So basically, it's about the structure. When you are writing an essay, you want your ideas to flow in a logical order, and when you're examining someone else's work, like maybe an article, a speech, or a letter, you want to take note of how they have a progression of ideas as well, because chances are they put their thoughts in a specific order to achieve a certain purpose. One technique that you might notice writers using, or that you might use in your own argument writing, is to acknowledge the counter argument. So you're going to have your own stance, your own side, but the counter argument is the opposite side. And sometimes it helps to acknowledge and then refute the opposite side. You need to remember that when you acknowledge the counter argument, you also want to refute it, because if you only acknowledge it, then it might seem like you're contradicting yourself. So one way to do this is through a counterclaim and rebuttal. So basically, you acknowledge what the opposition would say, and then you shut it down. You refute it and prove why your side is right. Another way to do this is through a concession and refutation. Now, I actually have a video about this on my channel, but a concession and refutation is a little bit softer, in my opinion, than a counterclaim and rebuttal. So if you concede, it means that you're admitting the merit of the other side. So you're not saying that they're entirely wrong, but it's more like, while it's true that they failed to consider this. So you're at least acknowledging some of the merit of the other side, but again, you still have to assert your position. By proving the other side wrong, by default, you're saying that your side's right. I mentioned earlier that there are 3 different essays on the AP Lang exam. So as of right now, the first essay you will encounter on exam day is the synthesis essay. Now, this might not be the first essay type that you go over in class, though. But a synthesis essay is kind of like a mini research paper. So if you synthesize, it means that you're combining elements into a coherent whole. Think of it kind of like a recipe. Each of you is going to be given the same ingredients, but how you put them together might be a bit different, and that's okay. So in this case, those ingredients are going to be the sources, and so you're going to be using the sources to support your own argument. For the synthesis essay, you are going to be provided with anywhere from 6 to 8 sources. Now, these sources can be anything from an article to a photograph, a cartoon, a chart, a blog, anything like that. And the sources are relevant to the topic that you're supposed to be looking at. They're going to give you different perspectives, and you get to choose which sources you want to use to support your claim. Now, it's really important that you select at least 3 of them. You don't get any bonus points for citing them all, but you do need to cite them. So when you cite a source, you can do it in a few different ways, but one way is to include the name of the source in parentheses at the end of the sentence that has the evidence. Now, I do have videos on this as well, and I'm sure your teachers are going to go over it, but just remember, for a synthesis essay, you need to cite 3 sources. The second essay on the AP Lang exam is rhetorical analysis. Now, this one is my personal favorite. I have several videos about rhetorical analysis on my channel in case you need future help. But let's break down what rhetorical analysis actually is. So rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. So when you do a rhetorical analysis essay, you're determining which choices the writer makes in order to make their speech, their letter, their article more effective. So on the AP Lang exam, it's going to be phrased one of 3 ways. It's going to talk about rhetorical choices, and then it'll either say to achieve a purpose, convey a message, or develop an argument. The College Board has stabilized their phrasing for the prompts in recent years. So if you look at some of the older prompts, they might say rhetorical strategies instead of rhetorical choices, but the task itself remains the same. So what exactly is a rhetorical choice? I have other videos that explain this in more detail, but I'm going to give you guys a crash course now. So there are rhetorical devices and rhetorical choices. Technically, you can write about both of them in your essay. A device is typically phrased as a noun, so maybe it would be illusion. And typically when we write about a device, we put the word uses in front of it, which is a weaker verb. Now, a choice is typically a verb because it's something that the writer does. So instead of saying uses an illusion, we could just say the writer alludes to. So as you're writing your essay, you really want to focus on including stronger verbs to convey what the writer is doing. Because remember, they make the choices in order to make their passage more effective. Now, there's something else that students tend to write about, which are the rhetorical appeals. Now, you want to try to remember that choices create appeals. So a lot of times students want to write about logos, ethos, and pathos. Those are the most common, and that's not necessarily wrong, but we need to remember that if we notice something is logical, for instance, so logos, there has to be a reason why, and chances are it's a choice that is conveying that appeal. So it could be facts or statistics. And just as a quick disclaimer for those that are starting AP Lang, it does get easier to identify rhetorical choices. So if it seems confusing in the beginning of the year or the first time you encounter it, don't worry, with practice, it does get a lot easier. Another phrase that you might see in the rhetorical analysis rubric and you might hear in class is the rhetorical situation. So you want to connect the rhetorical choices to the rhetorical situation. We want to analyze why the writer is making these choices. And part of that stems from the rhetorical situation, which is this combination of a few different factors. So it's the speaker or writer, the audience, context, exigence, purpose, and then message or argument. So a lot of teachers use either the acronym SPACE or the acronym SOAP to help you remember the rhetorical situation. So let's unpack what these terms mean. If you are analyzing a speech, then the person delivering the speech is the speaker. If you are analyzing something that was written, like a letter or an article, then we would refer to the person who wrote it as the writer. Now, when you're actually writing your essay, use the person's name, specifically their last name, instead of saying speaker or writer, because you want to be more specific. We also need to consider the audience. So that's going to be either a single person or a group of people to whom the passage is addressed. And if it's a speech or a letter, usually there's a very clear audience. If it's an article, you have to kind of infer who the audience is. It's also important to remember that some passages, though not all, have sort of like two audiences. So there might be the direct or primary audience, and then there might be a secondary audience. We also need to consider the context, which includes local, national, and international events, movements, or trends that happened at the same time as the speech or letter, or possibly in the time periods leading up to the text. Context is sort of like the big picture of what's happening, but the exigence is much more specific and much more narrow. So the exigence is the impetus or the catalyst. It's what prompted the writer to write or the speaker to speak. Now, you might also see this term in some multiple choice questions. We also need to think about the purpose or why they wrote the passage in the first place. Now, sometimes your prompt is actually going to ask you about how the writer achieves their purpose, but other times it might talk about the message or the argument. Regardless, you can still think about purpose as you're reading a passage. So we want to be thinking about the overall purpose of the passage, and then also sometimes there are sort of like sub-purposes at different points in the passage as well. As we're approaching a passage for rhetorical analysis, we want to ask ourselves the purpose of the choices that the writer makes, but also the purpose of the passage as a whole. Depending on what the passage is, it's possible that the prompt might ask you about how the writer develops an argument. So an argument is a reason or set of reasons given to persuade people of something, either to do something, to think about something, or to believe something. Now, the third question on the AP exam is an argument essay. So for that one, you as a student are constructing your own argument. So you're the one trying to be convincing. The third option that you can encounter on a rhetorical analysis prompt is that they could ask you about how the writer makes rhetorical choices to convey a message. So a message is a significant point or central theme. These tend to deal with either politics, society, or morals. If you have any questions about any of the terms that I brought up in this video, then definitely check out the other videos on my channel because I go into these topics in much more detail. Also, check out the description box below for some helpful resources. Please make sure that you are subscribed with your notifications turned on so you don't miss any future videos. And until next time, guys, happy writing!